Hello and welcome everybody. On behalf of the School Building Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to the April 21st Community Forum. And in a moment, I am going to turn it over to the professional team who's going to lead the forum. But before I do that, I want to remind everyone there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of this presentation. Regardless of whether you're attending via the Zoom app or watching through some other means, we will be taking your questions. Please stay tuned. You'll see instructions on how to submit questions. But first, I'd like to ask all of us to invest a moment of silence in acknowledgement of those who are struggling with and those who have succumbed to this pandemic. While you reflect, I'd ask you please consider the nature of what it means to come together as a community under conditions like these. Okay, I'd like to hand it over to Vivian Barbedian from Hill International. Vivian, I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you so much for having us, and welcome to everyone. And thank you again for joining us tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed later as mentioned. You can also access this on the SBC website and Facebook page, also, as well as the Swampscott Educational Access Channel and the Swampscott Town Facebook page. As mentioned by Mike, we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. We ask that you ask all your questions either via email, the Q&A button, or by submitting them to sbc@swampscottps.org. And feel free to use the text option at 617-821-5075. We will present these phone number as well as email address later during the presentation. We want to start this presentation by recapping the site evaluation process that we mentioned last week, as well as the traffic analysis that had everyone intrigued. We will carry on the presentation and present to you tonight on various school configuration options and the sites that we have examined. If you have any questions, we highly urge you to ask, and we will try to get to them as best as possible. Thank you, and I will introduce the LBA team and ask them to introduce themselves. Lee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Sherwood, the principal architect working for you and with you. And David?
Hi, I'm David Harris. I'm working with Lee Volley-Brenziger. I'm the project manager on this project. Pleasure to be here.
And I believe Anne is here too.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne, and I am your community engagement facilitator. I'm so excited to be here with you via Zoom to learn more about your project, your building, and your site.
Well, very good. Let's go to the next page. So those of you who were with us last week, we showed a quick process where we looked at every publicly owned site in the entire town. And then we slowly showed how we were able to eliminate certain sites because they were either not buildable or some other point, until we ended up with 5 possible locations to put a school. And I want to reiterate that just because we ended up with 5 here that were possible, that doesn't mean they're all very good. Some of them are better than others, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But from our very first promise, which was to be open-minded, to be objective, and to look at all different options, this is why we put so much time and effort into looking at these different sites. We ended up with, so the 5 sites that we're going to look at tonight are the DPW site, the existing middle school site in the back, the Stanley School site, the Hadley School site, and the Phillips Park site. So we will look at all those, and want to reiterate also that even though this project is called the Hadley School Project, it really is the elementary school project, and it has many different options available. Next. So I think the the wonderful thing about last week was that and it's still online and you can go back and watch it. And if you haven't, I recommend that you do. We had Rebecca Brown, our traffic engineer, do an extremely thorough and engaging analysis of all 5 sites. So if you look at this chart, which is kind of a summary of all of that, we looked at Hadley, Stanley, Phillips, Middle School, and DPW. And one of the things I've learned from Rebecca right now is that traffic is not just one thing like congestion. It envelops safety. It's important, like how many people are nearby and the families and the student density. Walkability is really important for a school. The more kids who walk, the more successful it could be and the less cars on the road. Queuing, for those who don't know, queuing is basically when you wait in line and you pick up or drop off your children, and kind of how do you create good queuing protocol. And then is there enough room for parking and all of that? When Rebecca went through this, she really came up with some conclusions, and the scoring system is like this. Pluses mean that a certain site and a certain concept was above average and was really an attribute that site did very well. A circle is the idea of a neutral site. Anytime you see just a circle or a yellow circle here, it means that the site, with the work that Rebecca thought that we could do to it, could work just fine. It just might take a little bit of time. And anytime you see a negative, we decided that a negative really was a negative, that we were going to be harsh judges. And if you see a negative here, it has a real problem in that category. And I want you to know that we weren't easy graders on this. So when you look at this, so what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces and they'll be part of an integrated analysis as we move forward this traffic study. Next. So I've been looking forward to this the last couple of weeks because we've had so many people. We've had environmental engineers, we've had our civil engineer, we've had mechanical and others look at all of these different sites and traffic and give us some real feedback on this. And a lot of the things that I personally thought about these sites, it changed my mind, or I realized that this is not black and white. One site is not just clearly better than the other. It really is a measure of all of the components together, and then you get a feel for what is best. But one of the things we wanted to do before we even get started, since we're kind of bringing things together, is we wanted to look at the 4 configuration or enrollment options that are possible here. These enrollment options, which many of you have probably seen before, have been established between Swampscott and the MSBA, the state, as to what their agreement would allow. The first option, option 1, is the idea of a district-wide K-4 elementary school. As you can see from the diagram, the idea here is that all 3 elementary schools would be taken and put into one combined school. And in that case, K-4 is taken care of for the entire town. And the Clark School, the old Clark School, could be used for administration and possibly even pre-K. And 5th grade would remain at the middle school in this option. So that's the largest option, and we will later on refer to this as the large option. There are a couple of middle-sized options. Option 2 is a district-wide 3 through 5 school. And that is interesting because it takes all the 3, 4, and 5th grade students from the entire town and puts it into one place. That's good because part of the educational vision of the town is to do this grade-based equity so that all kids in the same grade get all the right resources. In this particular case, you'd have a school That's around 540 students. Clark and Stanley can remain open. They would say each would be the K through 2s that were left, so each would still have their kind of small feel to them. And 5th grade would move from the middle school to this area, to this particular school. And then the other medium-sized school is option 3. Option 3 is the idea that you take half of the elementary school kids in the whole town and you build a school for that, and that's about 565 kids. And if I think about, if we think about that, you would be taking care of half of the kids, and then you'd have Stanley and Clark still available, and each of those would still be K through 4s for the other half of the kids split. I think that one way to look at this is it kind of has this idea for the future that you would probably build another school for the other half of the kids in the future. But that's just something that is part of a larger master plan. And the last option, option 4, is the idea that you go to where Hadley is right now, and you either renovate and add on to it, or you tear down the existing Hadley school on that site and rebuild a brand new Hadley. What that means is that Clark and Stanley remain untouched. Nothing in the funds in this agreement allow for, in this particular project, those 2 schools to be renovated or worked on if they're not part of a larger project. So this just focuses just on Hadley. And another thing to realize, and what we'll find this out, is that for this particular project, it's not enough to just renovate the existing Hadley, because with the program that is set forth with the MSBA, the space, you would need another 25,000 square feet of space to meet that program beyond what Hadley is now. So when we look at an option for that, you're going to see that just renovating Hadley doesn't meet any of the requirements that are set forth. And we would have to do a renovation and a big addition to it in order to have that happen, or we just build a whole new one and on that site. I hope that was clear. Next. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at all 5 sites, and we're going to look at different options on those sites that have to do with the size of the enrollment option buildings on that site. And we're going to talk about different criteria that have to do with sustainability and its ability to meet those criteria. We're going to look at the idea of community and how these buildings work with that. We're going to look at traffic still and site, and we're going to look at development, traffic and development, and we're going to look at educational merit and how they all work together. I think you'll get a rhythm of this as we go through. If you look right now at your screens, you will see an aerial view of the existing Hadley School. And this is really the smallest site that we have. It's just about 1.5 acres, which is not a huge site. But because it's an urban context, you can have a 4, right now it's really a 3.5 to 4-story school. And you can really go up, and it's in a historic area. So whatever we do here, we'll have to allow it to, be part of a historic context. We're quite comfortable with that. We do a lot of buildings that are in places where they really want to fit. Next. For each one of these analysis, I'm going to show you Rebecca Brown's traffic work from last week. It's a great reminder of some of the things that she thought would help every single one of these sites. And I know there was a lot of excitement because even if you don't build on some of these school sites, Rebecca had uncovered many approaches that would make the traffic and the congestion and the parking and queuing better at the sites, even if we don't select them. So this is her diagram of the Hadley school site. And just as a reminder, what she was talking, and I'm going to speak in her words, and so we'll see how that goes. What she recommended was that we take think of Elmwood and Sheridan as this kind of street that wraps around. And when you get to Reddington, formalize Reddington as a one-way street that goes towards Humphrey, sweeping across. And what that does is when you have all of the different cars coming and waiting along in the morning or in the afternoon, they can queue up along the road on the right side and people can still all pass them. And that will, oops, and that should really help with traffic. Rebecca also gave recommendations for changing some of the directions or of the side streets, like Rockland and Blaney and Elite, or making them one way so that the flow also worked better. When we finally get to where the school is, the idea is to create as much off-road queuing as possible. And lastly, she had a couple of ideas of, there's a green area right there between Rockland and King, where she was talking about maybe infilling that area, which is actually just kind of pavement right now, and allowing it either to be a park or even adding some parking there. Parking is really important here in town, but also queuing when all the cars are waiting. We do not want to block traffic, so we want it to flow. That was the general idea here. The other thing that Rebecca recommended is that while the small school, just Hadley, or the two medium-sized schools can work here, she recommended that a 900 student school, the large school, for all three was too much of a load for the cars here and for the traffic. And just to validate that, we thought that putting the school here probably doesn't really even fit without being more stories than would be appropriate. Next. So, David, I'm not seeing the entire screen. Am I doing something incorrect? Now I'm seeing the entire screen. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few different options on different sites and different sizes. The boxes that are shown in orange on the sites are estimates of how big that footprint would need to be to fit there. And what's important about that is that different footprints obviously leave less room for play or for something else. And you can get a good sense of how we could lay out these different sites. These are not necessarily designs. Whatever we move forward with, we're going to put in rooms and really design these, and then we're going to price them later as part of all this. So as part of this evaluation, we just want to understand the key points. So site concept one is the idea of taking the existing elementary school at Hadley, and you can see it says existing renovation in brown. In this one, we actually would take down the little the existing addition, because it's kind of inefficient and in the way of doing more additions there. And so what we end up with is doing a 4-story addition, kind of like pairing it with the renovated school to bring it up to the size and the square footage that it would need to be just to be the right size for the Hadley School. Again, to be clear, it is the MSBA and our determination that the existing Hadley School is not providing you with right size spaces. It does not have a real gym. It does not have a real cafeteria except in the very basement. And it doesn't have all the SPED and other support spaces that a school would need. So just a straight renovation just isn't enough. So on the right side, you're going to see, on each page, you're going to see 4 criteria important. So for example, if we do a renovation and addition scheme, it's about 70,000 square foot of space. And in terms of educational spaces, while it adds to the program and meets the MSBA guidelines, because the existing spaces are so inflexible, it's a very old and the structure is very inflexible. and many of the spaces are not right size. All the classrooms are small. It'll be very difficult to make this work in terms of good adjacencies and spaces that support education. The new part of the building, we can do wonderful things and make all great spaces, but the old part will take a lot of surgery and change in order to make it function well. So it actually gets a negative there. And so I have my red negative. And then in terms of district equity is the idea that you have different schools in town, and are these going to treat children in your town with the same resources and support them? So in terms of just doing Hadley, it improves Hadley itself. But when you think of Stanley and Clark, they would both be unchanged and they would not improve. And so let's face it, think about this. Hadley would have superior facilities and resources than the other two schools. And you'll have to determine how important that is to you. An interesting thing from Rebecca's work last week is that in terms of location, it's a wonderful location in terms of students and families. She had done this whole diagram that showed how so many families were in this area right here, and they could walk to it. And there's a lot of good sidewalks and things like that. And so it's really a great location for having some sort of school. And then in terms of traffic, there's a lot of traffic on Humphrey Street. And she felt that if you were to make Reddington a one-way street and to change and make some real improvements at the corners and intersections, that we could improve this to such a way that this would be a neutral site. Again, neutral is good. Neutral means that it's a feasible thing. Next. Next. I'm not getting the next slide.
Hold on, Liam, having some technical difficulties here. Hold on.
Okay. So while we wait, I hope that this is a good introduction to how we're going to treat all of the different sites right here.
David, if you
Yeah,
want,
my PowerPoint crashed.
if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen with Anne, the ability to share your screen with Anne, and that way maybe she could pick up where you're kind of freezing up.
Sure.
Yes, David, what slide number are you on? Because I'll go ahead and start.
Slide 11, Ann.
Okay. Host disabled. So I'm gonna just need the host to give me permissions, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We're all always dealing with technical difficulties here, but please don't go anywhere because this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, we're just getting going. So.
And for some reason, you can't be made a host. I'm not sure.
Can't be made a host. That hurts my feelings.
David, can you try again?
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to have.
If you wouldn't mind sharing it with me, then.
That's right. I was going to say the third in line here, in case of technical difficulties, is Vivian. So I'm going to just give me a minute here, everybody. I'm going to send this.
I have it as a PDF.
Well, that works great. As a PDF, you can just bring that right up.
Right. So if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen with me, I will do so right now. There we go.
Thank you, Vivian.
Apologies for all of if you can't see it as full screen.
Well, it's nice. It proves we all do get along, don't we?
Absolutely.
Is there any way to make this bigger?
I will. Is this better?
Well, no, it cuts off the We need
Yeah.
to see the whole thing.
There we go.
David, is there any way for you to do your, get back into
So as he
PowerPoint?
tries, we'll kind of,
Okay. David, let us know.
Yeah, I'll let you know. My whole remote computer apparently is freezed up.
okay.
Okay, everybody, let's get back into the swing of this. So if all of you can see this, we were on this sheet, which had education, equity, and now we're on this next page, which talks about site. So the 4 criteria here will be site and development, sustainability, community connections, and scale and character. Site and development means, is this a good site for the school in terms of how you can build on something? Is it an easy thing to build on? And development, in my mind, means, is there access to utilities? Is it going to cost a lot more? Are there premium costs because there's ledge or something like that? We really spent a lot of time looking at these sites to see which ones would be most efficient and cost effective as well. We don't have the actual costs yet, and we will, but having done this for many, many years and having our consultants, we know when something's a problem area and not. So in terms of this particular site, the actual site is just a sloping rectangle, and it has existing utilities. It's right in the middle of town. So it's not really a bad location to build a building. The issues are that it's a tight urban property, which means that when a contractor comes in to build there, there's not a lot of place to set up. I don't think we can take over Linscott Park as a construction zone. And it requires, no matter what at the Hadley site, it requires phasing and swing space. Phasing means that if you build a piece, you might have to build another piece and wait, build another piece back and forth. Swing space means that you may have to take kids who are actually going to this school, move them somewhere else for a while, for maybe a year and a half, and then bring them back when the school is done. One of the issues with doing a renovation and like an addition like this is that it actually takes longer to build than if you were going to do just one new building. And that's because you may have kids in the existing Hadley during occupied construction, which could be a disruption. You build the new portion of the school, and then when that's done, some of them might move over, and then you have to renovate the old school, which might be intensive. When we talk about a renovation with the MSBA, we're not talking about painting walls. We're talking about putting in all new systems, trying to make the exterior envelope as energy efficient as possible, putting in all new windows, all new, it's an extensive thing here. So it's not just a summer job. And the idea is that could take a couple of summers or something like that, and it would take longer. So in this case, it gets a negative for site and development because it's very complicated with a lot of disruption. Sustainability and energy, well, guess what? This is a kind of a great site for views and for solar orientation. When you think about a sustainable building, you think about photovoltaics and capturing electricity and creating your own electricity, and having windows and light wells that face south or the right direction to grab the sun and to use that to turn on so that you don't have to use your electricity on your lighting. So, and there are no environmental issues here to say. There's no wetlands, there's nothing underground that we know of that's contaminated or anything like that, because we started to do these studies on this. The only issue here is that when you do a renovation, there's only so much you can do to the exterior envelope of the existing building. So in this particular case, when I build this new addition, it's going to have modern construction and a whole nother energy envelope that really holds energy and works a very different way. No matter what we do to the existing building, it'll never quite perform like that. And that will affect energy costs and things like that. Hope that's fair. In terms of community connections, it's really a wonderful place for a school. It's downtown. If we do the school right, we can have functions in it that support Linscott Park and allows for other events and downtown uses. so that the public could use this building on weekends and or after school for different things. So you can imagine it, if you had a kitchen in there, it could start to help support other things that are happening right around it. It's also right next to the ocean, a wonderful opportunity for everything. The one down point here is that it really doesn't have any room for any, actual fields. I also want you to recognize how small the play, because of the renovation and the addition, the play area is smaller than it is now. And that's something it's not a large play area in the first place. And lastly, in terms of scale and character, when we met with the community earlier, they were concerned about having a building that fit the scale of an area and fit. And fit has to do with how it's designed, but it also has to do with its height and all of that. Well, what's interesting here is that, it's already a 4-story building and there's a lot of taller buildings around. So as long as we make it so it has this kind of tie-in to the materials and scale and proportion of the surrounding buildings, we should be able to get it to feel good. Its footprint is a little larger than it needs to be because we are using the renovated building, which is not efficient use of space, so we have to build a little bit more. And we want it to fit into the historic. So that's site concept 1, and you can see that it had a number of pros and cons under these criteria. At the very end of this presentation, we're actually going to take all of these pros and cons, these pluses and minuses. We're going to create a matrix or a chart. We're going to compare them so that you can see how all of them work in comparison to one another. And I think that's the way to make a decision here. Next.
So before we go on to the next slide, I'm going to switch it back off to David, who I believe his computer is up and running. So pardon me as I stop sharing and David will begin. Thank you, everyone, and we apologize for this momentary technical difficulty. I believe, Lee, you are back.
Okay. I just want to, before we go on to the next one, I just want to make a couple things clear. This is the initial integrated site analysis where we're taking traffic and building size and all of that, putting it together. At the end of this, when we choose like a few options to move forward with, the idea is that we're going to refine those options and then have them budgeted and priced. So the next iteration, you'll be able to see what cost does affect each one of these. We don't do that before we have enough information. Just a box like this is not quite enough for us to give you a reasonable and responsible cost. So that is our intent. I just want you to know that. So this is site concept 2, which is really the idea of building a brand new Hadley school. And it's the right size for so it's the smaller school option. And it's placed on the other side of the site, pushed up the street, because the existing Hadley can be kept there if you really want to phase it. Or which might be actually a less expensive option in the long run would be to take down the existing Hadley, somehow find swing space for the students and build it all at once. That would be a lot easier for a contractor and people to build this in a faster way. So we have to look at that, and we're going to give you choices when we look at the costs of such things. For educational spaces, it's better than the renovation because the spaces are all new. We can put them wherever we want. We can isolate them, and acoustically, we can put them in exactly the configuration that would be perfect for your learning. In terms of district equity, it's still the issue of having just the Hadley small school, and the other 2 schools are not improved. In terms of location and density, just like the last one, it's a wonderful place to have a school. Especially for this neighborhood and the families who live right here. And traffic and access is really the same as before. It's the same size school as before. It's just all new. And you can see that. One of the issues here, well, in terms of traffic and access, one of the issues here is if we build the school on the upper part of that site, we don't have as much queuing length as cars come down. In a perfect world, we'd come off onto our site and we'd come all the way along and drop off near the end of it, so there's more car length, and the building would be on the other side of the site. You can also see, and this is a really interesting observation, that the play area is actually bigger than before. If we do, it's a much more efficient building to build it new and not to have spaces and corridors and things like that in a existing Hadley school as the renovation. So we actually have a smaller footprint than with the renovation and addition. And that's pretty typical, we find. Next. It's working. In terms of site and development, it's really pretty much the same. The only, as the last one, it's the only difference is that it may be a little less disruption if we don't have kids on, for renovation, if we don't have kids actually in the school at the time it's being built. Sustainability and energy, it's better than the renovation scheme just because the entire building has new systems. The entire wall and roof and foundations are all insulated properly. The entire building has been brought up. And then, but one issue or possible issue with having the building up on this part of the site is that the houses that are right next to it might get shaded because the building is right there. We can try to step it, we can try to do different things, but building on this end of the site is not as advantageous as the other side. The community connections are pretty much the same. If you like its location, you like it. And in terms of scale and character, we can build a building that has scale, that feels like it fits, and it's an urban building. Clearly, it would be about 4 stories tall. And when I say 4 or 5 stories, what I really mean is that it's possible for us to go down on this site a story. We've looked at the underground. It seems to be dry. It seems like there's basements. And it's possible that we could put appropriate spaces down there, not where you eat and things like that, but maybe gymnasiums could go down and halfway into the ground and things. Ways to use the underground to make the building shorter. There's even been some discussion of bringing in underground parking, things like that. That's a wonderful idea and a very expensive idea. So we'll have to look at how things like putting in underground parking would affect the cost of a site like this. Parking is a huge issue here. We have talked a little bit about going to the Archdiocese. If you look down on this drawing at Blaney Street, you'll see a site that you probably all know. There's the convent and the school building for the school, and then there's a flat area. And there's been some discussion about creating a place where you could put in some parking spaces. And we're in the process of actually laying that out and seeing how many spaces you could put there, and if that could be used by the town, during faculty during the day and everybody else the rest of the time, because parking is so precious. Next. This is where it gets interesting. It was interesting before, but this is more interesting. Site concept 3 is the idea of building either the district-wide 3 through 5 or the half district K through 5 on this site. Obviously, these are slightly bigger buildings going from like 70 to 85 or so thousand square feet. But it's still it could be a very efficient building, and it could be built up. And in terms of traffic, Rebecca felt like this was still doable. In terms of educational spaces, we can meet all the requirements. And although you might say that if you were doing kindergarten through 5th, having a really tall building is more difficult because the smaller kids You really don't want them going up and down a lot. But when you think about a 3 through 5, at that age, kids can go upstairs and they're pretty independent. So it's not as difficult. Now here's an interesting distinction under district equity. You're going to see a plus and a minus. It's not the Swedish flag. It's something like the idea that for each of these two options, there are very different pros and cons. Under pros, it says grade-based equity and SPED for District 3 through 5. If you do a District 3 through 5 where everybody from 3 through 5 is there, it helps with the equity in town because, and with special education services, which you have a very robust special education service and programs here. And that really works well. So that actually gets the plus because it's doing a lot of great work. But for the half district K through 5, what we're really saying is that half of the kids in town don't get this new building. And so under cons, it says grade-based inequity and special education for only half. And then Stanley and Clark unchanged. So we do make the distinction between those two enrollment options. I will tell you that having talked to different people and faculty members, and we talked to most of the faculty members as well at all 3 schools, that the idea of a half district K through 5 where half the kids get the new building and half don't was not a very popular option for equity and for teaching and for special education services. But 3 through 5 did have a lot of support. I tell you that because it's really important for us when we talk to everyone to understand what your educators are feeling, the teachers who are actually using these buildings, how they feel about it. Location and density is the same place, so it has the same opportunities. Great walking score. And in terms of traffic and access, we can revise and modify Reddington, and we can make it pretty good. The real con is always to find parking. And parking in that area is very tight. Next. In terms of site and development, all the same issues, except this time I'm actually building, we'd have to take down the existing Hadley and build the building on the lower part of the site, closer to the ocean. And that allows the play area to be where it is right now, and all those houses are not blocked with from sun. And you can see that it's a fairly efficient building because it's a block and it's bigger than the just Hadley, but it's not so much bigger that we can't make it work here. In terms of sustainability and energy, it's an all new building. We can design it to be a high performance building. And in terms of community connections, it has a wonderful opportunity to connect to different parks. If it's a 3 through 5, you can imagine that age of child really starting to connect with businesses and with the ocean and with environmental science and things like that, having a little more independence and thinking that that could work. And then lastly, scale and character, we can make this work. Next. The middle school site was a site that we decided to look at because it existed. There are fields in the back. We're not thinking about building right next to the middle school. And our challenge was, is there a way for us to use all that land back there? And of course, it's a challenging location. Next. Our traffic study by Rebecca showed a lot of different areas where in the front of the existing middle school, she would create sidewalks and different flow a little bit, where she felt that she could actually improve just the flow and the traffic that's happening at the middle school right now. That was the first step. But really, I think the big idea here was if we were going to try to build a new elementary school in the back, say where the tennis courts or around that area are, we would look at the idea of creating an access over by Nason Road so that there were different flows through the site and that people were coming and going coming from different places in town a little bit. So to spread the load, let's say. And the other interesting thing is, that if you did that, it would be timed. So each school would have a different timing. Rebecca, with this site, also recommended that a 900 child, the larger school, was not appropriate for this area. Next. So what we did was we looked at the idea of a medium-sized school, either 3 through 5 or K through 5, the 540, 65 students, and put it back where the tennis courts are and the small Little League field right now. That's actually on the original site. The town, we believe the town owns that, clear of the golf course. And we tried to make it so that it had enough room there to work as a school. It's interesting because obviously you would want to evaluate the small field and the tennis courts and see if there's another place in town you could build those, because that is a really important thing in Swampscott. You have limited land, and where are your play areas? So that is a thing to really think about here. It's a new school, so we ought to be able to make the educational spaces work well. In terms of district equity, we still have that issue between the district-wide plus or the minus for the half the student school. The location and density, according to Rebecca's location and density studies, it is quite central to student population, as you know, and it's a quiet, safe, and good walking score. It is a benefit to build an elementary school in a quiet residential area where safety is paramount. The con is that it's very close to the middle school and the field. So in terms of traffic, Rebecca felt like she could really make this work if we were able to get a separate entrance in and she could do modifications. But we also have heard over and over that there's a lot of congestion here near the middle school, and that there's a lot of concern about having both of these schools in the same area. And we hear that over and over. And so I think there's kind of the technical, and then there's the real knowledge of we live here and this is what we see. And we're hearing both sides. So if we can create, though, that separate traffic access off Nason, you could have improved queuing length. And that means that people would show up and they'd move along there. People have asked about the field that exists in the area where we're talking about proposed access. And it's true that we would have to hug the trees there and try to come along, and it would affect that field. It also has, in the future, people have also asked, well, if we do renovations, additions, or build a new middle school, will there be enough area to build that? And that has always been one of the concerns about this whole site. So there are things about this site that we cannot solve, but we can try to improve it if this was the site. Is that fair? There's also limited on-site parking for this. Next. Site and development gets a low score, and that's because while it does have like woodland learning, and it's a basically flat site over there, and there's no swing space required, there's a lot of wetlands, a lot of water, a lot of ledge. There are wildlife species that we'd have to be careful of, and we'd have to get utilities all the way back there, real utilities and trenching and all of that. And all of those things cost money, especially the further you are away from a street. So we're cognizant of that. Sustainability and energy, this is a wonderful site. The sun is coming from the bottom of the page towards the building, so it has a wonderful south, and it's oriented to the south and the north with its long faces, and that's always good. It has nice views, it has woodlands, and can be an all-new building. Well, we have to protect the resources around it. Community connections, there are fields there that could be supported, and it's also near a future rail trail. Well, near it, the future rail trail would cut right through the middle of it, wouldn't it? And but then there's the whole idea of the loss of and relocation of the tennis courts and the small field, and that is a serious matter for this site that we would have to really talk to you about. Scale and character. A 4-story building, it's down there in that area. It might be a little out of place, but I think we could make it work. So that's how we look at the middle school. We try to be open-minded. We know that you've had a history with this site, and the challenge for us was, can we make it better? And that's what we tried to do. Next. Phillips Park site. You all know Phillips Park, and you all know that it's a big area, and it has a lot of open space, and a lot of kids play there, and it's in a certain area of town. We know that there's actually a coastal flood area zone here, and we'll talk about that. And we also know that this site was formerly a burning and dump ground in the early 1900s or so, and has all kinds of issues under the ground. So above ground, it looks like a wonderful place, and below ground, there's all kinds of things that we've, let's say, uncovered. Next. We looked at this site because of its size and its location and all of that. When we had Rebecca look at it in terms of traffic, what she in general said was that Humphrey, as you know, is a very, very busy road and has a lot of traffic on it, especially by the time you get to this area in town. It's a real connection. And in order to service a school back in this area, you would have people come down Humphrey, go down and queue around and come back. If you had the largest school, again, 900, the queuing for waiting cars would likely back up into that roadway, thus creating, let's call it a traffic nightmare. It's really too many cars, too many people. Rebecca did feel, though, that you start to get a little better when you get to the medium-sized schools on this site. Next. But there's a lot more to this. I mean, so if we look at the idea of middle-sized schools, 3 through 5, K through 5, once again, the educational spaces, if it's a new building, we ought to be able to make it really good. If we look at 3 through 5 school versus the K through 5 half district, the basic district inequity still exists. Location and density is interesting because it's not a bad location, but what we find is that it's very cut off from the rest of town. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's really cut off from walkers. Even though there are some houses on this side of Humphrey where kids could walk, the barrier of Humphrey Street is very intense. It's not a safe place to walk. You all have to cross that busy street, which causes more traffic. And as you all know, there's a huge hill, even cliffs, so the kids who live above coming down, they probably won't walk that way. And so when we get down to traffic, we get a solid negative because it's across the road on Humphrey Street. You probably have to put a traffic signal there, which I think would be a real shocker to everyone. It's very inconvenient for driving because of traffic, but also for walking. Queuing could back up on the street. Next. Site and development. So this is where we really learn a lot about Phillips. We've had a lot of questions, and there's some people who already know this information, but we wanted to show it to you all in a holistic way. On the surface, Phillips looks like a wonderful, flat, open field. Yay. But underneath the ground, there's all kinds of issues here, and many of you already know this. First of all, the soils are very wet and spongy, which means that any building that got built here would have to have piles that go down probably hundreds of feet to bedrock, which is an extremely expensive thing to do. There are two restrictions placed on this site. It is not actually I know it's been referred to as a brown field. It's not registered as a brown field by the state, but that's just a term that means that there might be contaminants on it. What is really going on in this site there are 2 AULs. These are limited kind of limited or use limitation authorizations put on this site. The first one is for the entire site, and it's a safety limitation, and it talks about the idea that there's glass and other fill materials throughout this site that could pop up through the ground in the freeze in every spring and be a safety hazard to children, and it's being monitored all the time for that. The second one is that there are little areas that have been found on this whole site that have certain levels of contaminants. Most of the contaminants are just fill. There's one place near where we're showing this building that actually has some oily substances and things like that. Contrary to beliefs, you actually are allowed to build on this site if you were to mitigate all these things where you were building. The problem with, and you would go through a process to do that. But the problem with that is that it would be extremely costly. For example, you would have to remediate any contaminated soils to special dumps and things like that, which is super expensive. You have to test all soil that you're touching, which is expensive. You'd have to bring in new fill in its place. So there are health factors with all of this, and there are costs. That on top of building there. Then there's the special flood hazard area that the whole site is in, which means that it's called a 100-year flood. Who knows when a 100-year flood actually happens? It could happen next year. And if in the case FEMA actually recommends that this site, any building on it, the first level or so, 10 feet up or more, not have any occupied space on it. So it would be on columns. Maybe you could put parking under it, but that's a pretty odd elementary school, I would think. Lastly, it's a park, so it's considered Article 97 land, and therefore you'd probably any land, open space that you take here, you'd have to replicate in a better way somewhere else in the town, and that's a difficult thing to do. This isn't just by choice that you would replicate it, this is by law. And anytime you do Article 97, you literally have to go through a real process, which would slow down any kind of movement on the project. If I put site and development and sustainability all together, I have a place that has poor drainage, that is difficult to construct a building and expensive, that requires piles, that's in a flood zone, meaning that I can't build on the first floor, and that has multiple limitations set on it that actually say the limitation is you cannot build a school here unless you remediate all these different things. So if we just look at it in terms of safety and health, it's a bad bet. If we look at it in terms of traffic, it's a bad bet. And if we look at it in terms of money, it's a very bad bet. So we'll talk about that later, but every once in a while you see a site that looks good, you look at it and you find out its true nature. And Phillips Park is a really good park, but we would recommend it not being a very good school site. Next. We also looked at the DPW site, and it might have been a little bit of an act of desperation, but the truth is that it had land, it had a certain size, and while you would have to relocate the DPW, I guess there have been talks about relocating it anyway. And so we decided that we would go for it and see if we could somehow make this work. Those of you who know this site realize that there's a big cliff, 35-foot cliff right down the center of it. There's a really low area, and then there's a really high area and a lot of ledge. Next. So in terms of traffic, this was very revealing. This road is a state road, Paradise Route 1A, yeah. And it turns out that there's a lot of accidents that have happened on this road and at different intersections. Rebecca had this diagram that showed that. So it's not a great place in terms of just driving in the first place. It also has that same issue as did Phillips Park, is that the kids would have to walk across a very busy street to get there. So it's almost like a barrier. And the best place actually to build or to have a school in her diagrams were the triangle of Hadley, Stanley, and middle school. That whole area in there was very safe and good for walking. The biggest issue here is that there's really no place for queuing. If you try, the site is very, very tight. If you tried to queue and get cars off the street, they would back up, even with a middle-sized school. Not obviously the largest school doesn't fit here. But as you can see, those little blue cars, they're blocking up the next intersection. And really don't have to go much further than that. And also, Rebecca said that it's not an appropriate place for kids walking. The sidewalks are tight, there's industrial areas. So let's go to the next slide. So we looked at it in terms of educational spaces. As architects who do educational buildings, we saw a building that stepped 2 stories from the front to the back with possible 2 entrances. And for an elementary school, that is not ideal in terms of supervision, in terms of connectivity. It's not a great place for collaborative or even safe learning. The district equity really is the same always with the 3 through 5 versus the K through 5, plus and minus. The location and density, this is not central to students. It's close to Clark, which is odd to put a brand new school right near Clark School, which would still be there. But also, it's right in that industrial area. So, you know, when you drive by there, you see the, I think there's a gas station and an electrical station right there. All of those things make it fairly unappealing. And we already talked about traffic, but I'll also add that if you were going to do much along that road, you would need mass DOT approvals because it's a state road, which is another thing that we'd have to go through. Next. There's a so for development, there's a 35-foot cliff bisecting the site. It's a very small area, top and bottom. It's close to the bridge, electrical facilities. There is an environmental paper that shows that there are tanks listed as being below grade, some kind of gas tanks, but we haven't seen them, but they were never listed as being removed. And then we would have premium costs for structure, for ledge removal, utilities. I think you get the idea. Sustainability and energy, there's not a lot of natural space around. Community connections, it is close to Abbott Park and the future rail trail. By the way, for those who talk about Clark School and Abbott, we're not actually allowed to build on Abbott Park. It is a protected park because of its funding sources earlier. So we're not allowed to really do a school over there and do flips and things like that, just as an aside. And then it would be a strange building along there, having a 4-story building right along that street with all the smaller buildings. Next. So this is our last one. And last we get to the Stanley School site. The Stanley School site, you all know very well. It has the Charles Ewing Woods Conservation Land to the south of it, which are wonderful places, and still the kids use them all the time for learning. It has the Unitarian Church site to the left on this page, and then it has an access point above, and it has the school with its wonderful playgrounds, and it has a big open field, which one would think would be a great place to try to build a school. Next. In terms of traffic, on this site would be the site where we would be able to build the large school option. In other words, you could take all 3 schools, the 900 kids, and they would fit a school of only 3 stories, which is a good scale for this area, could fit on this school, and we would still have plenty of room for fields and play. What's interesting is, and we got creative here, and Rebecca was really good. Rebecca felt like the Orchard Street, Orchard Road connection could be really helped with walking path, with better sidewalks, with a one-way kind of designation. that allowed things to flow much better from that side. One of the things to remember about this site right now is that there's parking in the middle of the site right now for just the faculty. Then all of the parents have to park on the street and walk their kids from wherever they're coming into the field and then walk back to their cars and all of that. And obviously that creates all kinds of issues, and our job is to solve that. So we feel like there's actually enough room on the site to create queuing on site, whether we do a loop or just in different ways, to get all those cars who drop off the site. But the really clever thing here would be to take, since we're adding more cars, is to have that improve the side off Orchard Road, but then create off of Forest Ave into the Unitarian site a new connection and drop off. The town is already in connection, is already in talking with the Unitarian church people about this area here. There's already suggestions of a paper road and connections in the past going through that area right there. The idea here is that if we can disperse the traffic in different directions, that obviously it spreads it out and creates two different connections to the school. Imagine with a Unitarian church during the week, you could use the parking and the access, and during the weekends not. So it's really a very possible approach to all this. The other thing that it could do is if we do a larger school, we want to make, smaller learning communities. So let's go to the next slide here. In terms of education, we feel like this could work. And as a 3-story school, probably a little better than the 4-story school, because kids don't have to go up and down as much, things are closer. As you can see, it has a larger footprint. This is the only site where the larger school really works. And with our new traffic dispersal, it probably could work, at least for Rebecca's opinion, it could work just fine. For district equity, it gets a plus because this is the only solution that takes all of your schools and gives all students, all special education, all programs, the same quality and resources. So it kind of takes care of all those kids and families at one time. Right now, there are kids who, if they have a special education program that they go to, they actually have to go to a different school because the programs are dispersed among all 3 schools in different places. The location, it's central in town. It's a safe, quiet neighborhood, good for walking. It is less central to students. There's less students in this little area than even over by the middle school down the street. Traffic and access, if we have multiple access points for distribution and create on-site queuing lengths so that if people come, if you drive your car and you come in the afternoon and you're waiting for a half hour, you're on site. If we really take care of that, because there's room for that, we can make this work. The con, and maybe it's a pro and a con, is that doing this site requires quite a bit of street and sidewalk improvements, which you may want to do anyway, especially towards Orchard Road, to really make that a much safer and connected place for walking and all of that. And there's an increase of cars because you're going from one number to another number of kids. The idea is to keep the cars moving and not have them all stop, block traffic, walk the kid in and out, but keep it in a queue and keep everything flowing. Also want to make the point that if we do this, our focus is not to connect to the Forest Ave on the right. There's the small street, Forest Ave, that actually goes all the way down to Humphrey. And what we're trying to do is avoid that because it's a very narrow street. It's not an appropriate place for access. And when you get to the bottom of that street, it's a very kind of a crazy intersection. So we're trying to make that for walkers and have our access in different ways. Next. In terms of site and development, it already has utilities. It has good access. No swing space is required because you would have Stanley School up and running the entire time this is going on. In the end, I think all of the options actually leave a Stanley School there. All three of the other options, you would have Stanley remaining, maybe with different grade configuration. And in this one, you'd still have your neighborhood school because it's where the kids would go. So you could still walk your kids to school. It does have some surface ledge at the top of the field. And we have to protect the surrounding conservation land and wetlands, which is very important. Sustainability and energy, it's a wonderful place for solar. It's coming from the bottom of the page, the sun, and we can collect all kinds of sun, and we can build a new place. And it has the adjacent conservation land, which has the stones that kids sit in and they learn there, and then they go into the forest. And we're going to save all that, and we're going to use it for programs. And we would still have a field and play areas for local use. And obviously the building would have a lot of shared community spaces. It would have a cafetorium for events. It would have a gymnasium for people to use and all those different things, and playgrounds. And it would be near the future rail trail right above it. In terms of scale, the footprint would be smaller if this was a 4-story school, and we can look at that. But it felt like here, if we could do a 3-story school, we could be more in character with the scale around it. That would make a big deal. And the big challenge here is, how do you do a large facility and make it feel small? And what we're learning, and there have been lots of options here done, is that the trick is to do small learning communities within this. So for example, after talking to the faculty, we'd probably end up having a lower elementary and an upper elementary school in the same place. So imagine, if you will, having one building on one end of this building that is just for K1 and say 2. And all those kids are there, and it has its drop off. And on the other side has 3 and 4. So it's the upper school, and it has its own drop off. And then all the space in the middle are the shared spaces, the gymnasiums and the cafeterias like that. And if we do it right, it will feel like 2 much smaller buildings, and we create little learning spaces inside. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I'm saying that it has been done in the past, and if we're good architects, we can make that work. Thank you. Next. We just went through a lot of information, and the goal tonight is not to solve all the problems of the world. It was just to let you see how you can put all this stuff together. But there are some conclusions we can gain. Our first community meeting was to talk to everybody who came to the meetings. There was actually 2 meetings, and to ask them, what's really important to you in this town? And there were a lot of votes, and we don't, so these bubbles that you see here are actually the kind of intensity of the votes that each subject got. And these are directly from the community. So for example, site location and traffic, huge issues in town. And as you can see from our criteria and the things we were looking at, we recognize that. Sustainability, energy, and efficiency, as well as, kind of the cost approach, are also huge in the town. Community focused and exterior character, those 2 kinds of things we looked at that. And that has to do with scale. It has to do with, can the community use the building? Is it appropriate? And then there's a lot of, and then school size and enrollment. And then there's a lot of things at the bottom, all those oranges and yellows, that have to do with equity. And then, is it supporting education and all of that? And that's the educational spaces. So you can see, we took all of those different ideas and all of those priorities that you have in town, and we use those as our evaluation criteria. Now, you can always think of more criteria, and we can judge each option accordingly. So next, here's this very interesting chart, which took millions of hours to do. The idea here is that at the very top, we have all of the different criteria. You see the bubbles? Those are the same bubbles from the community bubble chart that we just looked at. Those are your priorities. And then we translate them into 4 different pillars of information and criteria. The first one is education. And under education, you see educational spaces and district equity. Those are the same categories that we had running all through our analysis. So you can always look back and see what happened there. But our goal here is to kind of bring all this together. The second column in green is traffic. Traffic means location and density, which is really important, location in town. And then traffic and access, which is queuing and all the congestion. And we have our scores, that's our column. Then the next one is sustainability, site and development and energy. And the last one is community. So we have, ready? Click. So we have education, that's the first column. And on the left, what I want you to see in those blue columns are we have 3 different groupings. The top grouping that has 1 and 2 on it is the small school, 390 students. Remember that? So that's just Hadley, the addition and the new. The next one, the grouping of 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the medium-sized schools that are either on Hadley, Middle School, Phillips, or DPW, and we looked at those options. And the last one is the one place where we can put the larger school in Stanley, and we look at that. Our goal here today or tonight is to look and try to cross-reference these 2 things and start to understand them. If we look at the first column, which is education, educational spaces and equity, and you start to look at how the different options relate to them, you see under the first one that you see that Hadley addition and renovation actually had a couple of negatives there and did not score well because it was a renovation for spaces, and the equity was not the highest score because you only get 1 school. And then the educational spaces were better, so it got what we call a neutral. And remember, neutral is fine. If we had all neutrals, we'd have a pretty good school. But negatives, not great. If we go down to the next level and you see the medium-sized schools, you can see that the new Hadley, that's the medium-sized, say 3 through 5, is good for spaces. These are all the same pluses and minuses that we looked at before. And then here's where there's a little trick, which says all 3 through 5 has all pluses for that area, for that whole zone. That's because the 3 through 5 school was considered very good for district equity because it took care of all those grade-based kids. But then the half, where we actually took half the kids and gave them the new school and half the kids and left them behind, they got all negatives. So we split that column. What you see right away is that the things that we just learned find its way into this. If you look down at the DPW, you see that education and the district equity are both minuses. And then lastly, when you get to Stanley, it was great for equity because it took care of all the students, gave them all the same resources and special education as well. And it's a new school and the educational spaces are shared. It's very efficient and it gets a plus. And that's how we're working it, okay? So if we go to traffic, the whole column there, the idea here is that you have your pluses and your neutrals, but then when you start to see those negatives down by Phillips Park and by DPW, that really gets your attention because negatives for traffic and traffic and site being so important to you, to see those negatives there should really get your attention. Next. Under sustainability, the biggest thing now, most of the sites, we can make a good building that's energy efficient and has good sustainability issues. Phillips Park gets a minus for sustainability because it is actually possibly unhealthy, unsafe, and therefore that's the most unsustainable thing. But for site and develop, minuses here really mean that it costs more. The renovation addition will cost because it'll take longer and the development will have more disruption. The middle school was way far back and had a lot of resources that had, ledge and stuff. Phillips Park, that if I could put 2 minuses at Phillips Park, I would put 2 minuses there because it has so many cost implications. DPW has a huge cliff up the middle. I don't think that that would be very inexpensive. And the Stanley School gets a plus under development because we have a flat site. Yeah, it doesn't take any swing space, and it should be fairly easy to build. Lastly, community. We didn't explain community too much, but the idea is that if we build this school, it wants to connect and provide resources for everyone in town, not just families and not just students and faculty. It could be multi-generational. It could have areas about learning and on weekends and other, it's going to have a lot of different spaces that could be shared, not just on the outside with the fields, but on the inside with those spaces. We know that Hadley was just a great location for a school because of its connections. And all of the other locations actually for community could all benefit the community in those locations. So they got a lot of neutrals. Scale and character, we feel fairly confident that we can build a good school with good size and character and scale down the building to make it appropriate with materials and proportions. Although, when we got to the DPW, having a 4-story building along that, right on that edge of that road, just felt way out of scale and didn't think that was appropriate at all. So it's interesting to look at this in terms of these columns or these pillars. What if we look at it the other way? Click. Next. And we start looking at it in terms of which is the best solution or option for each of the different enrollment sizes. So, question. You have a 390 student, just Hadley School. There's the idea of an addition and renovation and the idea of new. Now, we can't necessarily throw out the renovation addition yet because it has some minuses, because we really need to see what the pricing tells us. Some people will contend that it's possible that a renovation would cost less, and therefore we should really consider it. We tend to agree with you. We don't think that we should make a big judgment on that. What we will point out is that in terms of education, it gets lower scores because we can't make the right kinds of flexible, right-sized spaces next to each other in the right configurations that we'd really want to do in a new school. So it does have its drawbacks. The other negative here is when we get to site and development for the addition, and that's because it takes up more of the site and it takes longer to build. So it's more disruption. But if you look at that, those are the scores, and I think a reasonable person would say that other than district equity, which you really can't do anything about because you're just building this one school, especially a new small school on the Hadley site is a reasonable alternative. Next. Then when we look at the idea of middle-sized schools, this is very interesting because, how do you compare these? Well, the Hadley New, which is 3 through 5, gets fairly consistent pluses and neutrals. And the only place where there's a negative is if you, instead of building a 3 through 5, you try to do the half K through 5, it gets a negative. So if you don't look at that, that's pretty good. The middle school has pretty good scores all the way through this, but when you get to site and development, it costs more. And I think a lot of people would say, the traffic and access is still an issue. We have a neutral here because we feel like we can really improve it. But there are a lot of people there for the middle school already, and I know that people have a lot of opinions about that, and they should. Phillips Park has a lot of negatives just by itself. There's that one option, and it has negatives for traffic, but it has negatives for site development, which is costly, and for health and safety. And then DPW has the most negatives of all, so it wins. And it has It's just a poor location and very poor traffic and other issues. Then we go down to the bottom and we say, what's the very best for a large school? Well, guess what? After all that work, we really see only one site that's appropriate to do a larger school, but it's very appropriate. You're kind of lucky that way that you have this alternative. And Stanley could hold a larger school, especially now that we've, if we establish that we can have two separate accesses and queuing off site, we think that traffic could be made to work. And so it has pluses and neutrals. So if you were to ask us how we see this evaluation, and hopefully you're following along at home and really getting this, click. We kind of see it like this, and let's see with your questions if you agree with us. And obviously your questions will be more than that. We actually, in this drawing here, we actually are recommending that if we were to move forward and to continue to refine and then price a few options, that maybe we think about taking the Phillips Park site at this point, and we can only do this with your blessing, and the DPW site, and take them off the table. I think we've done enough exploration to know that neither one of those sites is an appropriate place to put any kind of school building for myriad reasons. And that's why we phased them out. We'd also like to bring up the concept that maybe the enrollment option, that's the half the town, K through 5, which had all the negatives for equity. Maybe that one, we don't have to take it off the table, but you can talk about whether that's appropriate. In one way, what we're trying to do here is not pick the actual one to do right now, but to continue to narrow down our filter and through our columns to get to the place where we have a number of sites that we continue to compare, and then give you really great next generation information on these, so that we can refine the cost and the designs of these most viable options. So if we were to make a recommendation based on everything we've heard so far and everything we've learned, we would say that these 5 options were the best ones to move forward with based on all of the criteria that we've discussed, that we learned from you, and that we put it through this filter. I'm done. At this point, what we'd like to do is open it up to questions and discussion. And again, remember that we do not have to choose something, but we do want to gain direction from you of all this. We are not done. This is the beginning of a process, and it's a lot of information. So who's in charge of questions and
Thank
Great.
you, Lee. We see that there are a few questions already asked.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any further questions, please feel free to, again, either ask them through the Q&A. You are also welcome to text message questions to 617-821-5075 or to sbc@swampscottps.org.
Thanks. I think you may have a slide with those details on that, or could we possibly put that up on the screen for the watchers at home? Because I know that's a lot of numbers.
Well, the next slide is that, again,
Great.
if you have a question.
We'll be monitoring this email as well.
And what will happen is when people ask questions, we may want to zoom back and look at different slides to answer your questions or to discuss it.
So I wanted to thank the folks on the design side, the project management side, for doing a great job. There we go. And you've got that 617 number up there presenting this topic tonight. I've received a number of questions both by text and through the Q&A function. We have folks monitoring this email as well as the text number shown on the screen. We encourage you to ask your questions. I just want to lay out how I'm going to handle the question and answer section here. Some of the questions coming in deal with the process as a whole and not necessarily what was covered tonight. in the interest of time, as we have about 30 minutes left, and considering the experts we have on hand tonight that may not be here in the future, I'm going to start with the questions that are coming in about what we just discussed. If we have time at the end, we'll discuss those other questions. And I've got a number of comments that aren't really in a question form. Trust me, we'll share those with the committee, but unless we have a whole bunch of time left over, I don't anticipate in getting to just comments unless there is time. So with that, I think I will start with the question. Let's talk about, Neil asks, what is the feasibility of building a K-5 at Stanley?
Yep, that's a wonderful question. And what happened was, remember you were in partnership with the MSBA with this whole project. And we have 4 enrollments that your town brought to the MSBA and kind of went back and forth on. My understanding is that one of the discussions was, can we do a K-5? And I don't know the exact reason why, but the MSBA did not accept that as an option, doing a K-5 for the entire school. They have their criteria for why they do things. Maybe it was because it was larger or something like that, but the MSBA did not accept that as an enrollment option. And therefore, in partnership with the MSBA, the town went with the next best thing, which was the K-4.
So these this is Vivian from Hill International. I just want to let you know that these 4 configuration options have been vetted through the MSBA, and the MSBA does have an educational planning department within its organization that helps work with the superintendent and the school building committee as a whole in identifying the areas where they want to pursue with the new school. So these have all been recognized by the MSBA as valid options.
I think one of the reasons why people would have liked it to have maybe been a K-5, even though it's larger, was to get the 5th grade out of the middle school. On the other hand, think of it like this: if we're able to do this, you would be able to move pre-K and possibly town offices over to Clark, and therefore you could have more room in the middle school to make 5th grade work better and for other needs over there. But that's the side question. Next.
Great. Bill asks, would the Stanley option have fields with lights?
Oh, wow. I don't know. It would have a field, but it would be more of a, obviously a, if we went to that option, that site plan, David, if you can scoot on over there, you could get a field on there, but it would be more like fields for elementary age kids, most likely. You could put you could probably get a nice soccer field on there, and then it could be used to be broken down. And putting lights in a residential neighborhood like that, I think that's something you really want to really think about. We do follow what's called, I know why you're asking this, but we follow night sky provisions, which means that you don't want lights in the view of any residents or anything like that. And I think that's a whole nother discussion. And I would say that the answer is maybe. And it's probably not my choice or my decision to make, whether you put lights in a place like this. It's not normal for an elementary school to have fields with lights. How's that sound? But it could benefit the whole town.
Thank you, Lee. That's a great answer. Ariane asks, why so few parking spots when some of the options are for 900 students? For instance, new Twin Elementary School in Acton for 990 students stipulates 270 parking spots, and that's with busing already in place there.
How many parking spots?
Acton apparently has 270 parking spots dedicated to this new school.
Right, and that's the elementary school?
An elementary school for 990 students, Ariana says.
Right. Well, parking is my understanding. Well, first, parking is going to be a negotiation. It's a very important thing. In your town, you struggle with parking spaces. If we do the Stanley site, it would be really nice if we could use the Unitarian site for a lot of the parking right there. And then, but our numbers are a little, and then we could put parking on the site. Our numbers are a little different in terms of how many, there's the number of parking spaces that you need for faculty and for staff and for visitors during the day. And then, which is nothing near something like 270. It's less than that. And I think that we wrote that down, David, somewhere. We had some estimates from the engineers.
Yep. Let me grab that.
Okay,
Hold
you
on.
look at that. And then there's the idea of events and things like that. And that's where everything is very different when you have events. And I'm guessing that that we'll get as many parking spaces on any of these sites and near any of these sites that we can fit. And I know that sounds kind of nudgy right there, but the truth is that it's a bit of a back and forth here. You really don't want to take this whole site and put a huge parking lot in the middle of it. So let's talk about parking more.
I'll wait for David to come back with that while he does.
Okay.
Neil asks, you mentioned you could go down into the basement of the Hadley site. Is it possible to do that at other sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. We know verifiably that at Hadley we can do it because they already did it and it's well draining. Certainly at Phillips and DPW, the answer is no, because what's underground there is not useful, and that's one of the reasons I think we have come to the conclusion that those sites don't work. Stanley is interesting. It's possible that we can go down in Stanley, but we'd have to do test borings throughout that field. Remember, there is visible surface ledge at the west side of the field along the edge of near the Unitarian Church, and all we can do is assume right now that there's other ledge. Our next steps would be to start doing borings there and to get a better sense of even more cost implications. Again, it's not our, I also want to say, and then what's the other one? The middle school. Middle school will have a lot of ledge, and whenever we see a place that has a lot of ledge, we tend to back off from the idea of building down. For some reason, Hadley doesn't have a lot of ledge right there. So this is interesting because there are different ways to generate parking numbers. I know I really did not give you a sufficient answer right now. In your town, I believe our research shows that you actually do not have an official zoning parking regulation for the schools. And we can verify that, but that's what I've been told. But there's always like the need in making it being a responsible address. For example, look at Hadley. Hadley doesn't have anywhere near the amount of parking spaces that it would have if it were in a suburban setting. If you base just on the Institute of Transportation Engineers data, they would, for an elementary school, they give you 0.13 spaces per student. You would have 117 parking spaces for the 900 kids school, 270 for the middle ones or so, around 70, sorry, for the middle ones, and about 50 for the small Hadley. Parking is going to be, go ahead.
Can I ask you to just restate that, because you're getting back to the question of referring to the 270 spaces?
Say it again.
Can you
Sorry.
just restate that? You're coming back with the answer regarding the number of parking spaces.
Sorry, yes, David Harris put on the this slide which shows in general what the recommendations are. And there are 117 for the large school, around 70 for the middle schools, and around 50 for the smaller school.
It's just hard for folks to see it that size. So
right, and what I would
that's the
what I would say is that in every option there's going to be parking is always going to be difficult in your town, and we want to come up with the best solution. But we also want to balance the idea of how do you handle events. How do you handle parking? What we want to do is get parking off the street during the days. And we want to get, when you have events, you might be parking on streets and stuff because that's how you kind of do it in your town. We're trying to understand who you are. And if you take a huge place and you pave it, then you have a lot of unsustainable and impermeable surfaces. And that's not great for the environment either. So it's a real balance. Which we'll go back and forth with throughout this process. I hope that's a slightly better answer at this point.
Tanya says the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee would be concerned about the proximity to wetlands and the Ewing Woods at Stanley. And could you comment about that and or any loss of open and play space at Hadley should Stanley be chosen?
Please say that again.
So one, at the Stanley site, proximity to wetlands in the Ewing Woods.
Yes.
The question also says there would be concern about the loss of open and play space at Hadley should Stanley be chosen. Perhaps that envisions the redevelopment of that site and the loss of that very small ground on the north side.
Well, that's a pretty easy answer. Basically, as you can see, the existing Stanley School actually goes right next to the woods. We would be extremely cognizant of the existing resources and wetlands. There are provisions for staying for your CONSCON, your Conservation Commission will have distances from wetlands that we need to maintain. If we have to do anything with a wetland, we would have to go through a process of if we have to just take a little piece of it and we'd have to rebuild it somewhere else, probably we can not have to deal with that at all. And I don't foresee us, the way that this site is set up, I don't foresee us touching Charles Ewing Woods in any way other than to make it a wonderful resource for the kids. So there are provisions and rules for that, which we would follow. In terms of Hadley, that's very interesting. If you did the Stanley School and Hadley as a site became available, some people have said that it might be a wonderful a commercial opportunity because of its location and because of your tax base and things like that. If that's the case and somebody took down the Stanley School and redeveloped it, there's actually a right of way through, supposedly, that my friend David Harris was telling me about, through the park, Linscott Park, and then in perpetuity, there's supposed to be a connection. Supposedly, there's supposed to be that connection. It's supposed to be able to connect all the way to Reddington in some kind of document. If you did a development there of any kind, I bet you anything you can make all kinds of provisions for that development. And if there wants to be a place where there's green space in a park, that could be part of it. And that's really up to you and your town and how you approach that. But that's the smart way to maintain green space and all of that. Is that a good answer?
Great, I appreciate that. Katie asks, what site testing has been done with regards to contaminants?
Over by Phillips?
I would expect she's asking about every site.
Right. We have David Harris. We've done a testing over at Hadley already, right?
Yeah,
Because
we're doing what they call phase 1 environmental site assessment in Hadley.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, our geoenvironmental consultants I've also done what we call a desktop review of all the sites to see if there's any pre-existing records of site contamination. And that's obviously how we got a lot of information on Phillips, which we went into detail tonight. But yes, we're looking at all of the sites to see if there are any red flags with regards to environmental concerns.
I think there's been some testing over at Stanley in the last go around, wasn't there?
There was a hazmat survey done for the building.
But not the site yet?
I'm not sure about the site. I don't think there was.
I think one of the things that we would do next.
The middle school had a phase 1, I believe.
Yeah, the middle school had a phase 1 in certain areas done. This is like more subsurface. I think that we're all very interested in looking under the field over by Stanley and understanding. We don't, well, you know what? We can't expect anything. When you can't see it, you don't know. And I think that's a very important thing. So I don't want to say anything that's just not, that turns out not to be true.
Great, appreciate that. I think this is from John. The presentation was a little confusing on the medium-sized configurations. K through 4, 3 through 5. Where do the other grades go if we built one or the other? Can you go into more detail about the configurations?
Let's go to that chart again. This is confusing, and I wish I could explain it better, but sometimes when you're looking at so many alternatives at once, it's hard. You're talking here on, if you can see your screen, I hope, you're talking about option 2 and option 3. So let's focus on that for a second. Those are the medium-sized configurations. In option 2, which I keep calling the district-wide 3 through 5, the concept is that we would build a school that was big enough for all the 3, 4, and 5th graders in town. So it becomes its own little like pre-middle school in a way. It's kind of like this upper elementary. Everybody's in the same place. In that scenario, Stanley still exists and Clark still exists. What you need are K through 2 students left, right? So Clark would be a K through 2 and Stanley would be a K through 2. Obviously, any of the K through 2 kids from Hadley would go to those, and any of the 3 and 4 would go to.
There would definitely be a little bit of redistricting within the Swampscott district. So Clark and Stanley can remain open, and we would be used as the K through 2 for the entire district, still giving it a small town, small neighborhood school feel. And the 5th graders would remain at the middle school as they are currently.
Yeah, and obviously the benefit of that is that when it comes to education and district equity, all the faculty and the district educators that I've talked to have told us that having all the same grade in the same school is of great benefit to their teaching and to the students, because all of the students in the same grade across the whole school, the whole town, get the services, and the services don't have to be split up. Great benefit to them.
Lee, it's Martha. I think, Vivian, what you just said, the 5th grade actually would come out of middle school, the 3 through 5.
Yeah, it moves from.
Right.
They move from,
Moves
right,
out
okay.
of, yes,
They
moves
move
out
out
of
of.
the middle school.
Okay.
So the other benefit of this one is obviously, so you still have your smaller neighborhood-like schools, but they're both K through 2s, which is nice because then parents can walk their smallest children to school, and it has a different feel to it. The 3 through 5 becomes a very different thing, and you get to take the 5th grade out of the middle school, which some people really desire. So that one is very clear. Let's go to the option 3. The idea of K through 5 for half the district. This means that you would build a new school and you would take half of the kids in town and they would go to that new school, including some 5th graders from the middle school. And then Clark and Stanley remain open and they take the rest of the K through 4 kids. You can't do K through 5 because they're not big enough to take the 5th graders from the middle school there. So some of the kids would be still at the middle, some of the 5th graders would still be at the middle school. And then you would have K through 4s, kind of the way they are now in a way at Clark and at Stanley. The reason that it's considered inequitable is that half of those kids, K through 5 in town, would get a brand new school and all the different resources and all the different spaces. Believe me that a school nowadays is very different than a school from the 50s, 60s, or 70s in terms of breakout spaces and flexible multi-purpose and technology and all those things, accessibility, so different. And the other schools, the kids there and the families would not have those resources. And that's probably the biggest reason why oftentimes the 3 through 5 would get all these pluses, and oftentimes the K through 5 for half the district would get all those minuses in our evaluation.
During previous community engagement seminars and sessions, we heard very loud and clear how equity plays a huge role in this town. And with the option 3, yes, it is an option for half the district, but it wouldn't provide equity for all students.
So there's
I hope that helped.
It did. There's one question here. I can't exactly tell who it's from, but remarking that the graphics aren't super crisp on the screen. Can you review quickly what options are still in consideration? I think you just went through what the options are.
All of these options are still in consideration. So
Right.
option 1 is one that we do have to definitely review and take into consideration, a district-wide K through 4, as well as option 4, which is per the MSBA, we always have to still look at renovating and rebuilding the current Hadley Elementary School as it stands.
Right.
Option 2, as Lee just moments ago reviewed, was a district-wide 3 to 5, which is still an option, and option 3 for half the district. We did review some of the various sites, and we have found a site that can facilitate each of these options. David, if you wouldn't mind going to, I think, the last slide before the, yes, that one. Where here you have all of the options and pluses and minuses for each one of them. So for the 360 students, which would be the Hadley, addition renovation or a new Hadley, we have a location and an option for that. For the 540 students, that could be either option 2 or 3. We have locations for that one as well. And for the 900 student district-wide, which is the option 4, we have a location for that as well.
So any of those size buildings can be built and meet your criteria, right, Vivian?
And
Correct.
school,
It's just a matter of which direction the town would like to pursue.
Some sites are better than others, and some options are better than others.
cool. The question was what's under consideration, and they're all still under consideration.
They are. We're not a big fans from everything we've heard of the of option 3, which is the half, which is half the town gets something and half doesn't, because of the inequity of that. But it's really not our decision. It's yours.
With about 5 minutes left here, I'm going to try to get through a few, and then I have a number of the same question that's actually a great wrap up. So before I get to that, Neil asks, what is the reimbursability of demolition costs? In particular, were we to build at the Stanley site, would demolition of Stanley and Hadley be reimbursable?
Take it, Vivian.
No, unfortunately, it would not be reimbursable. So
Well,
if we were,
one of them is.
one of them is, but the second one would not be.
Yeah, and so we actually talked about this, Neil. The idea is that if you build at Stanley, clearly the Stanley School would be the one that, would be part of the demo for the site and the whole site work. Hadley, what would happen probably is if it became a development project, you'd sell the site and the building to a developer, and they would have to do what they would do with it. And that would be their business, right?
Right, and they would
tear
be
it down and all that.
responsible for the demolition portion.
That's probably how that would work out.
And I think that addresses a question from Dana that says, was any consideration of weight given to what would occur to current schools and no longer be needed?
Yes, in options, in 3 of the options, Stanley and Clark actually remain. And in the large school option, Stanley would be taken down because you'd already have built the big school on Stanley site, and then you'd have your field. And then Clark would be reused as probably, as we talked about, a possible preschool slash some of the school offices.
So just in recap, option 1, district-wide K through 4, Hadley, Clark, and Stanley are offline. In option 2, district-wide grades 3 to 5, Hadley would just come offline, where Clark and Stanley would still remain open to K through 2 grade schools.
Right. So Vivian, before you go on, I just want to make a point again that offline doesn't mean that it's not used.
Correct.
So if you go to option 1, district K through 4, you build a large school, Stanley gets torn down, clearly offline. Hadley could be sold offline, right? And then Clark would have a purpose. It would be pre-K and offices. So the term
Administrative.
offline is I think the question is, how would they really be used and are they efficient? And that's the plan.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up here, I see questions that essentially touch on the same topic from Shauna, from Steve, from a number that texted in, from
How much does it cost?
Rebecca. Well, it's twofold.
Okay.
It is, what is it going to take to answer the question of what's it going to cost? And where are we in this process? What happens next? And what are the downstream ramifications of when decisions get made?
That's awesome. First of all, the next step is to, after showing you this and getting some feedback, and if you know, after looking at these options and getting these options together, the next step is to refine these options that we select to move forward with, and then to do a pricing exercise. Vivian and the OPM, working with our estimator, we'll go to each of these options. We'll do some quick design work with all of our engineers and all of that, and come up with what we feel are budgets. And they do this all the time, so they're really good at estimating how much a school, given the right information. And that's the very next step. And go ahead, Vivian.
With that, if David, you wouldn't mind going to the very last slide, we don't necessarily want to take too much time and effort in doing a cost analysis of every single option and every single configuration. So we want to do is definitely do all 4 options, but also look at them specifically on the sites that make the most sense to place these schools. So where the Phillips Park and the DPW don't necessarily come with high recommendations by a few of the analysis, such as traffic and environmental, as well as walkability for students and for the population, we'd take those offline and take those off of the decision to move forward in pricing. So we would definitely price all 4 exercise for all 4 options, but also look at exactly the sites to place them at.
And in your second question, which is where we are in the process, is the good thing here is if we take those 5 options and we take them to the next level, and we come back to you in another month and a half or so with basic little design, with more matrix, but also how much they cost and all of that, so that cost and phasing cost and all of that can really get into your decision-making process. You don't have to decide even that day, because then what we do is we take those options and we submit them to the MSBA, and they want to see that you've looked at all these different things so that they can talk about it. Then it comes back and we do some more work in limiting with you. You may get it down to like 2 options. You might say, we like this one and this one. Which one is going to, and then here's the question, which one is more likely to get the votes? Which one is going to be better for taxes? Which is, you know, all that. So you have lots of opportunities, especially over the next 2 months, right, Vivian?
Absolutely.
2 or 3 months, really.
2 or 3 months, actually. A
Right,
little longer.
so this is like your your confusing introduction to all of this information. And what we're trying to do is make it to a place where we're using the same criteria. We're right smack in the middle of it, and you don't have to decide tonight.
And our next session is more focused on the educational visioning for the schools, and that will help guide the decision making as well. So no decision needs to be made immediately. We still have time to review and look at all of these options, and cost will be a huge factor.
I think one of the parts of doing this in a different way, where we actually show you the process, is that we don't come back at the very end, which would be in like a year, and say, this is the one we chose. This is how much it costs. This is what it does educationally. We're actually very dedicated to showing you these bits and pieces as we go, and then building upon it and giving you the information. In some ways that could be irritating, but in a real life, you really know what's going on, and you can help with the process and help us and help guide us. And that's what we're trying to do here.
I hope that answered the questions well.
Great. I think that was extremely helpful. I appreciate all the time from the professionals, and I think we had a good cross-section of community questions, many of which we couldn't answer here tonight because they dealt with broader topics that wouldn't have allowed us to maximize the time we had with the professionals we have tonight. However, every one of these is being recorded by the committee, and maybe Suzanne will hop on and discuss future communication or how we're going to plan to address some of the larger questions that folks have raised.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, I think that every question we didn't answer, some of them we have emails for, some of them I have just phone numbers for. I will make sure those people get a personal response to those. And then ones that I think that the building committee will just talk about the questions that weren't answered publicly and see if there's a theme there, or if there's some information to pass on to the committee at large. I think we'll do that as well. But some of these questions are going to be relevant in the next session, next forum we have potentially when we're talking about educational vision. And then some of them might be relevant again when we're having a forum about sustainable design and sustainability. So certainly I hope people keep attending and asking questions, but we will get them answered.
For the folks who are still here, Suzanne, maybe highlighting that there are additional forums coming, and we'll get to as many questions on each of those as we can. But this document that was reviewed tonight, as well as the recording, will be available?
Yes, as I think I had mentioned it earlier, it'll be available at the SBC website and Facebook page. And I know that it is currently being live fed on Swampscott Town Facebook page and will be available at Swampscott Educational Access Channel.
As well as the document itself.
Yes, the document as well. Also, our next session will be on educational visioning. So I would really hope to see just as many attendees attending and listening to that one.
Great. We did have a few questions that came up on that. There will be an interesting conversation that evening.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
So from my standpoint, just trying to help get as many questions answered as possible, I want to thank all of you for doing a real hard job shifting screens back and forth, virtually passing the baton to one another. I think you've done a great service, and we will continue to push you hard to get our questions answered.
Thank you. And we appreciate all of your efforts as well. Thank you everyone
very much
for attending.
Great. Katie?
Thank you very much.
It was lovely to have you all here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be seeing you again shortly. Please come to the SBC website for our information about our next community forum, which will be coming out later this week. And we would love to have you there and love as much input as possible. So be emailing the SBC be using that website link and sign up for email updates so that we can be emailing you too regularly. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.